entertainment, sports, news, and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
All right, folks, back to the developing news. It's been developing and breaking over the course of this show. First story, the downing of Malaysian Airlines 777 with 295 people aboard. Reportedly now, there are reported to have been 23 Americans, and there's a report in a British newspaper, unconfirmed, as is the number of Americans, that a U.S. congressman may have been on that flight. Joining us now is Peter Brookes, former CIA officer and senior fellow on national security affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Peter, crazy day. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Well, let me ask you, we now have confirmation from our government. Joe Biden and others, unnamed, have confirmed that this plane was shot down. And now we have, I don't know if you've heard the latest, reports that Vladimir Putin is blaming Kiev, saying it's Kiev's fault for not halting attacks on the rebels, which to me is basically a tacit acknowledgement and a roundabout way of saying, yeah, the rebels shot him down, but they had good reason to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible tragedy, obviously, at a human level. But the fact is the geopolitics are even more complicated now. I think the U.S. intelligence probably has a pretty good idea of what happened. They're just not sharing it with us yet. My sense, it probably was a Russian surface-to-air missile, probably operating out of Ukraine. The big question for me, Steve, right now, obviously, other than the terrible human tragedy, is what role did Moscow have in this? Did they approve the movement of this surface-to-air missile battery, if that's what happened? Did they support this policy, or was this a rogue commander that moved across the border and was fighting with the rebels? So there's still a lot to learn, but it certainly makes the geopolitics of it much more serious than it was previously.
Well, let me ask you, let me play devil's advocate. If Russia was eventually going to deny any role whatsoever, that they, we don't know how they got this missile battery. It was moved, giving an excuse for the actual firing of the rocket. You made them do it, kind of thing. I mean, why would he go there to soften it up in the first place, and then come back and say they stole the rocket launcher, we never gave it to them? I just can't. I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate. Wouldn't seem to make sense.
Sure. I think Steve, if I put on my my public relations crisis hat, my sense is that he's looking for time and space to come up with a story.
Yeah.
Of course we don't know all the facts yet, okay? But if we're assuming that Russia had something to do with it, it was a Russian surface-to-air missile battery. What he wants to do is he wants to push people back on their heels until they get their act together. The fact of the matter is, my belief is, Steve, is that U.S. intelligence will run this to the ground pretty quickly, and we'll probably know a lot more, obviously, in the morning tomorrow about this. And I think it may be very difficult for the Russians to be able to deny it at all.
What would the geopolitical ramifications be? I mean, if this was a Russian, rocket and a Russian battery, and whether it was a rogue commander or not, if the Russians, if they have this Russian equipment, either Putin says we're going to take all that back, this will never happen again, or he keeps saying, well, they made him do it. How does the United States respond? Because reportedly, Putin spoke to Obama about this earlier in the day while talking about the sanctions that were imposed yesterday on the telephone, leading the president to come out before an event today and say this looks like it's going to be turned into a real tragedy. But he had spoken to Putin, so I'm a little confused here. What are going to be the penalty for Russia to pay on this?
Well, my sense is that, and I don't know this because we don't know what happened in that conversation or what went on in the White House, but my sense is that the president put these additional sanctions on Russia because they knew of the movement of this more advanced equipment. And I'm not very surprised by it because the air war in eastern Ukraine has been stepped up. We've seen a Ukrainian aircraft shot down. There was a report of a bombing, and dropping gravity bombs on a building in a town in eastern Ukraine, and people were pointing fingers at one another, saying it was the Russians, saying it was the Ukrainians. So the air war has stepped up, and this would be part of that. And my sense is that the president believed that Putin wasn't playing by the rules or the agreement he made, and that's the reason he stepped up the sanctions. Now, I'm not sure of that. I guess we'll know that in the coming days. But yeah, I mean, the United States, I mean, depending on, how this thing turns out, the United States, I think, needs to exert some international leadership and crack down on the Russians further with European partners and others. I think this is probably a horrible mistake. I can't believe that anybody would shoot an airliner like this, that are involved in this conflict. I think it's going to turn out to be like we've seen in the past with the KAL-007, with the Russian aircraft, and the American airliner. I mean, I think it's going to be a terrible situation. In fact, there's some reporting out there in social media that these guys thought they shot down a Ukrainian transport plane.
Right, yeah, there's some reports that that the plane wasn't in the airspace, the passenger jet wasn't in the airspace when it was supposed to be. So that sets up the MO for claiming that it was a mistaken identity. Now, with 23 Americans reportedly, not confirmed, aboard, and reportedly, possibly, according to one a British newspaper, a U.S. congressman and other people of other nationalities, several countries, the international pressure to do something is going to be immense.
I agree with you, and hopefully that sort of pressure will lead the sides to bring this conflict in eastern Ukraine to a quick resolution. That's hopefully what will happen here. I mean, this is an unnecessary conflict. It's Russian aggression. I doubt we'll see a change to what has happened in Crimea, but I think that maybe Putin will come to his senses and stop this he's undertaking in eastern Ukraine by supporting these rebels, especially with these very, very sophisticated and capable weapon systems.
Yeah, very, very frightening. Do you have a few more minutes to stick or no?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no, because I do want to get in I do want to talk about the Gaza incursion and get your take on that. A lot of news happening, of course, today. So stay where you are. We're talking to Peter Brookes, ladies and gentlemen, security affairs at the Heritage Foundation. So we brought you the latest on the downed Malaysian Boeing 777. I would like to get his take on Israel's ground invasion of the Gaza Strip just about an hour or two ago. All that developing as we speak. We'll get Peter's take on it. When we come back, we'll be back with more of the Steve Malzberg Show. Don't go away. Busy news day, and we're covering it all for you right here, only on Newsmax Television.